My name is Michael Harper. All my life I considered myself a good person and a believer. I served in the church, prayed, and tried to follow the commandments, but there was always a small voice of doubt somewhere in the back of my mind. On the day of the accident, I didn't think that everything would change forever. It happened on a deserted road late at night. The car swerved around a bend, and I felt a body cut through the air, then a bump, a crunch of metal, blackness. This is followed by absolute silence and emptiness. I was lying out of time, out of space. There was no body, no consciousness, just a void that I had never imagined before. But this void wasn't dead. It lived, breathed, and throbbed with something ancient and alien. I felt eyes on me, not physically, but much deeper. It was something that saw my soul, explored every nook and cranny. And suddenly a figure appeared. She was surrounded by light, but it wasn't blinding. It penetrated, slicing through the darkness. "Michael," said a voice that was both thunder and a whisper. "You've crossed the threshold, and now you must see." I tried to turn away, but my body wouldn't listen, my mind couldn't escape. "What should I see?" I asked, feeling fear mingle with indescribable trepidation. The figure came closer, and I saw eyes, deep, endless. It was Jesus, but not the one I was used to seeing in icons and paintings. It was a creature filled with both boundless love and terrible justice. "You will see the truth," he said. A truth that many people are afraid to admit, because it destroys illusions and exposes the soul. And at that moment, a picture of the world unfolded before my eyes, which I could not understand and did not want to see, but was forced to accept. The void into which I had been swept after death became something alive, as if I were in an intermediate world, where every thought and every feeling was exposed to the limit. Jesus didn't look away. His presence was so strong that it was as if time had melted away and only this meeting remained fateful and terrible. "Michael," he said, "you've been following the right path all your life. But what if I tell you that many of your brothers and sisters are wrong? That many souls are drowning in the abyss, without even knowing what the reason is?" I wanted to protest, to complain that I had seen many believers, kind and honest people. But a voice inside warned, "Be quiet, listen. The most deadly sin," Jesus continued, "is not pride, envy, or rage. This is a betrayal of one's own faith through inaction." He showed me visions of millions of people passing out of this world every minute, sealed not because of their sins, but because they refused to see, hear, or act. They turned a blind eye to evil, turned away from the truth, swallowed the lie, and became passive at the moment when their voice could have changed everything. Every hour, every minute, thousands of souls are drowning in the abyss because they have allowed themselves to be indifferent. They betrayed the light by their silence. The picture widened. I have seen cities and churches filled with people who walk and talk about the faith, but do not live it. People who are afraid to stand up to evil because it is inconvenient. People who sacrifice the truth for comfort and recognition. And that is their greatest sin, he repeated, the sin of indifference. Because evil grows where no one dares to call it by name. I felt a chill run down my spine. My own fears and doubts came up like waves. What if I was one of them, too? What if I've been looking the other way for too long? But there is hope, Jesus added softly, for those who dare to wake up and tell the truth, even if the whole world turns away. At that moment, I understood. I was given more than just knowledge, I was given a mission. And I had to come back to tell the world how terrible and insidious the sin of silence really can be. When I came back to life, I immediately felt that something had changed forever. My heart wasn't beating as it had before, but it was pulsing with a message that couldn't be ignored. But with that came fear. I am a pastor, a man of my word and faith, and now a new truth burned inside me, terrible and irreconcilable. It demanded action, but every time I tried to talk about it to others, the words stuck in my throat. They felt too sharp, too uncomfortable. In my world, the world of the church, it is customary to talk about mercy, forgiveness, and love. But I had to tell you about the sin that burns brighter than any hellfire, the sin of silence, the betrayal of one's own soul through indifference. Every night I woke up in a cold sweat, hearing the whispers of voices, the voices of those who had died in inactivity. Their eyes were filled with reproach and pain, and the desire to be their voice was torn from inside me. I tried to find support among my colleagues, other pastors, ministers. But their answers were vague and safe. We must be merciful. Let's not judge each other. God is merciful and will forgive everything. But I knew that silence wasn't the answer. The word mercy began to sound like a cover for inaction. Jesus said, "You have to say it even if you get rejected." I couldn't help but be afraid. How can you accept that your brothers and sisters in the faith may turn away when they hear the truth? How to convince those who are used to turning a blind eye? But fear is exactly what he wanted to show. These are the chains that evil holds humanity captive. Time passed. I started writing. Every word is like a hammer blow, breaking down the walls of delusion. I talked about how inaction creates darkness, that faith without works is dead, and that everyone is responsible for what happens around them. I sent these texts to friends and posted them on the church's website, but the response was cold. I began to be shunned, suspected of excessive fanaticism. One night I had a dream. The same light. The same look. And the voice of Jesus, soft but unwavering. Do not consider those who reject you as your enemies. They are the lost ones that you must lead home. But don't act like them, don't shut up. I woke up heavy and determined. My mission was just beginning, and there was still a lot to understand and tell. Week after week, I tried to get my message across to the community. With every speech I made in church and every conversation I had outside of it, I felt an invisible wall of alienation grow around me. My words about the sin of silence seemed too heavy for many. In the eyes of the congregation, I became a stranger, a person with an alien and frightening truth. One day after the service, I noticed several regular listeners exchange glances and quickly leave, as if afraid of my gaze. One of the senior members of the congregation, a man who had always supported me, came into the office and said quietly, "Michael, maybe I should soften your words a little. Faith is not only about fear, but also about love." I nodded, but my stomach was churning. I knew I couldn't lie to myself and them. This love he speaks of would be empty if it turned a blind eye to the truth. On those nights, I often returned to the place between life and death. There, in the silence of light and darkness, I saw those who had set out on a road strewn with indifference and indifference. They were standing at the entrance to the unknown, and a shadow hung over them, heavy as lead, the sin of forgetting and not paying attention to their soul. Once I saw a face in this vision, a simple, familiar face. It was one of my friends who always urged me to be moderate and compromise. "Why don't you say anything?" I asked Jesus in the vision. He answered quietly but firmly. "Because many people are afraid of losing comfort and recognition. But true service is to go against the current, even if you get mud thrown at you." In reality, I was already beginning to feel the first blows, rumors, disbelief, sidelong glances. Ministers began to avoid me, and some even openly claimed that my words were destroying the unity of the church. Sometimes I was alone in the great temple, hearing only the echo of my own thoughts, where fear, doubt, and determination mingled. But I knew that if I gave up now, all those who were waiting to wake up would forever be left in the shadows. I took up my pen with renewed vigor. My messages became deeper, stronger, and sometimes tougher. I said that silence is not just a sin. This is a betrayal. And just when it seemed that my strength was running out, I felt that I had not only my own will, but something more behind me. It had been a few weeks since I had felt the support of an invisible force, but things were only getting more complicated from the outside. Each new day brought new challenges. The inner fire ignited by my encounter with Jesus burned me from the inside out, but there was only a cold alienation around me. I woke up with a heavy weight on my chest and voices in my head, as if the world had split into two: one, the world of flesh and habits; the other, the world of truth revealed in that otherworldly space. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one morning with my wife, Lisa, by my side. She was looking at me intently, but the words I wanted to say got stuck in my throat. I saw more than just worry in her eyes. There was fear of losing me. Michael, she said softly, maybe you should get some rest. This is all too much for you. I sighed and pushed my coffee cup away. A conflict broke out inside me, as if two elements were fighting for power. I was terrified of losing her trust, but even more terrified of betraying what I saw. That night, I was back in that shaky space between light and darkness. Where time did not follow the laws of physics, I saw many faces, familiar and unfamiliar. They were all facing the trial of their own consciences. Jesus came to me and said, "See them? Every hour, every minute, millions are plunged into the abyss because of silence about the most important sin, the sin of forgetting the truth, the sin of refusing to hear the call of the soul." I tried to ask a question, but the words stuck. Then he pointed to a lone figure in the crowd, sitting with his head bowed, surrounded by shadows that seemed to be devouring him from within. "This sin is not just a blunder or a mistake," Jesus continued. "It is a voluntary closing of eyes to the light. It is a choice to remain in darkness for the sake of comfort and inactivity." I could feel his words seeping into every cell of my being. My doubts began to throb, as if I was standing on the edge between light and shadow, and the choice was up to me. When I returned to my body, I couldn't sleep. Every night I would hear an inner voice telling me to move on, even if the path led through loneliness and misunderstanding. I began to keep a diary. I wrote down every thought, every vision, every doubt. There were not only words, but also drawings, symbols, fragments of phrases that seemed like clues. One morning a friend, John, a pastor from a neighboring parish, came to see me. He noticed my notes. "Michael," he said carefully, "you're getting too carried away. Maybe it's just stress. Anesthesia, feelings?" I looked into his eyes and saw not just doubt, but fear that I might reveal the truth that would disturb their peace of mind. I answered, "John, the truth is never convenient. It requires courage from us." I saw what was happening behind the veil of everyday life. And it changed me forever. John shook his head and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Thus began my inner war, between wanting to be understood and having to tell the truth, even if it alienates those I love. Every step felt like a challenge, but I knew that if I stopped talking, millions would continue to walk into the darkness. The world seemed more divided by the day. As I walked the streets of the city, I increasingly felt that passers-by were not just people, but shadows whose faces were hidden by dark masks. I saw their eyes, empty and cold, like reflections without a soul. The flame of truth still burned inside me, but there were shadows in that flame, doubts, fears, despair. One evening, after a long day, I went out on the porch of my house. The sky was covered with heavy gray clouds, as if the sky itself was warning me of a coming storm. Suddenly I felt something moving behind me. Turning around, I saw a hooded figure standing in the shadows. The face was hidden, but the voice was right there in my mind. "You're going down a road of no return. The truth that you carry is a burden that will destroy many. Are you ready?" I felt a chill run down my spine. This shadow wasn't human. It was something else, a dark messenger trying to talk me out of the way. "I'm not looking for ease," I said out loud and inwardly at the same time. "I didn't come here for peace." The shadow paused, and a spark of malice flickered in its gaze. "Then prepare to be alone. To the fact that you will be hated, rejected, and feared." These words became prophetic. That night I had a dream. I was standing on a desolate plain where the ground cracked and heaved. In the distance, a tall tower rose, dark and spiked, like spikes that could pierce the sky. Long shadows stretched toward the tower, endless chains of people bound together by invisible ties of ignorance and fear. Jesus appeared next to me, and there was no condemnation or anger in his eyes. Only the deepest compassion. "Do you see this tower?" he asked. "It is a symbol of power that is built on lies. But the most terrible thing is not the tower itself, and those who voluntarily follow the chains, not trying to free themselves." I woke up in a cold sweat. It was a warning. I had to understand that the struggle is not only external, but also internal. Fighting for souls, and for your own. Shortly after this dream, I noticed a change in myself. The eyes began to perceive the world differently. Each face was like a book in which I read pages of hope and despair at the same time. I began to see simple things that suddenly took on a deep meaning. The falling leaves on the sidewalk reminded me of the cycle of life and death, and the old broken mirror on the road reflected distorted images, a warning of the lies that surround us. The path became more and more dangerous. I realized that every truth has a price to pay. And it was then, in the shadow of the coming storm, that I met her, a woman who seemed to know more than any of us. Her eyes were filled with wisdom and bitterness, and her smile was a faint shadow of hope. She said, "Michael, the path you have chosen is not easy. But you're not alone. Truth will find its warriors." These words became a light in the dark night of my mind. Ever since I met that woman, my perception of the world has begun to crumble and resurface at the same time. Every conversation, every word, every shadow became parts of a puzzle that I put together with effort, and at the same time I was afraid to look at the final picture. She invited me to a meeting, but not an easy one. The meeting place was an abandoned temple on the outskirts of the city, where the air was thick with dust and secrets, and the walls held the whisper of forgotten prayers and dark spells. It was a place where the boundaries between light and darkness seemed thin, almost transparent. I went there with a heavy heart, feeling that ahead of me was not just a conversation, but a test of the soul. Inside the temple, it was dark and cold. The candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, as if ancient demons and angels were fighting in an eternal dance, mirroring the struggle inside me. The woman was waiting at the altar, her eyes shining with impenetrable determination. "Are you ready, Michael?" "What is it?" she asked. "What am I going to see?" I asked. She sighed, and there was both sadness and strength in her voice. "The truth about who the real Antichrist is hidden behind the masks of lies and deceit. And this revelation will change your understanding of the world. But remember, not everything you see will be comfortable." She placed her hand on an ancient scroll covered with symbols that seemed both familiar and alien. Opening the scroll, she began to read. "In the last days, when light and darkness clash in the final battle, the wrong person will appear. Not an enemy in the usual guise, but a mirror reflecting the inner fears and vices of humanity." I felt as if the walls were closing in, the air was getting denser, and my thoughts were becoming entangled in a spiral of doubt. "Who is this Antichrist?" I said. The woman looked straight into my eyes. "The Antichrist is not a human being. This is an idea that lives in the hearts of millions. It is a soulless shadow that feeds on pride, indifference, and betrayal. And many, without even suspecting it, become its carriers." I felt something bursting inside me, as if the illusion of security and knowledge was being shattered before my eyes. But how to deal with it? I asked, my voice shaking. "Understand and recognize that the darkness is not out there, but inside us. Embrace your weakness and seek the light, even when it's dark." These words sounded like a sentence and a salvation at the same time. When I left the temple, the world seemed different. Even the air was heavier, and every sound was a harbinger of change. That night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I realized that my journey was just beginning. Truth burns, but it cuts with a sharp blade. And now I must decide whether to accept it or retreat into oblivion. The night that followed me leaving the temple was the most difficult of my life. I lay in the darkness of my room, my eyes wide open, my mind racing in an endless maelstrom. The voice of the woman, the mysterious creature that had appeared in front of me, echoed in my head, making my heart beat faster and my mind clench into a knot of fear and doubt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was surrounded by an invisible darkness, solid and tangible. It was as if it breathed nearby, penetrating through the walls, through the cracks in the windows, lurking in the most familiar places. This fear wasn't just terror, it was knowledge, a curse, and a call to action all at once. I woke up with a heavy head, as if I was being hit by an invisible fist. There was smoke in my eyes, and I felt that the world around me had changed, although everything remained the same outwardly. In the church where I served as pastor, the faces of the congregation seemed to be masked, lifeless and alien. They were saying words of prayer, but I could see the emptiness in their eyes. Indifference gave way to indifference, faith to superficial habit. Their pride, which the woman had spoken of, was growing like mold in the church's soul. I started trying to share what I saw and heard with them, but I was met with confusion and even suspicion. Some scoffed, putting my words down to stress and fatigue, while others avoided the conversation. I knew that the real battle was not for the walls of the temple, but for the hearts and minds of the people around me. In those days, I felt like I was on the verge of insanity. My prayers became silent, but no less desperate cries. I wasn't praying for salvation, I was praying for enlightenment, so that people's eyes would open and they would see the truth. I felt alone, as if I had been put on the front line without weapons or support. One evening, as I was returning home from a long service, I looked up at the sky. There, among the familiar stars, a strange light flickered. It didn't look like a star or a plane, it was a living light, pulsing and changing shape like the breath of a huge creature. Instantly, the image I had seen in the temple flashed before my eyes, the shadow with the mask, the Antichrist, the reflection of all the lies in the world. My heart skipped a beat in my chest. The sign was right there, and there was no way to ignore it. At home, I sat down at my desk and opened my old, battered Bible, but the words on the pages seemed different, alive, addressed to me. The verses of the prophets took on a new meaning, the prophecies came to life as if animated by the wind of change. I spent long hours in prayer and meditation, trying to find strength and faith. The inner tension grew, but so did the determination. I was reminded of the quiet but firm voice of Jesus that I heard during my near-death experience, "Seek the light in yourself and around you." These words became a beacon in the dark abyss of doubts and fears. I realized that this test is not a punishment, but a path that I need to follow, no matter how thorny it may be. I decided I couldn't give up. This struggle is for souls, for the light that is dying in the world. I will go forward, even if the path is lonely and full of dangers. There is a fire burning in my heart, and I must become the bearer of that light, no matter how heavy the cross I carry. The days were getting harder. I could feel the darkness gathering around me, not just outside, but inside, in the hearts of those who once called themselves my brothers in faith. What I had seen and heard during my experience was now a curse as well as a truth. Every morning I went out into this world, as if on a battlefield, where the enemy does not carry weapons, but penetrates the mind, soul, and even words. I have seen guile infiltrate the church, disguise itself as virtue, and turn pride and vanity into idols that people worship. Meetings with parishioners became increasingly tense. Some of them tried to ask questions, others went silent or looked at me suspiciously, as if I had suddenly become an enemy. I spoke of the sin that leads millions of souls into the abyss, of the lies that are so artfully implanted in the hearts, of the call to be attentive and watchful. In response, I received coldness, alienation. The words were too harsh, too incomprehensible, too fearful. But I couldn't stop myself. This fire inside of me, this unbearable truth, haunted me. I knew that I was standing on the edge of a chasm between light and darkness, and it was my job to keep the chasm from swallowing me and those who would listen. One night I had a dream. In this dream, I was standing on top of a mountain with a storm raging around me. Lightning tore through the sky, and thunder rumbled so loudly that the earth itself seemed to shake. In the distance, I saw a figure, a tall man in a dark cloak, his face hidden, but there was light behind him, and crowds of people were swirling around him like moths flying to a fire. He was smiling, but it was cold and lifeless, like the reflection of a dead soul. I felt a wave of horror wash over me, and I heard the words, "You're looking for me, but you're afraid of me. I am the one who came as light, but brought darkness. You call me an enemy, but I am the mirror of your fears and desires." When I awoke, I sat in the dark for a long time, trying to make sense of the dream. It seemed like a warning, a reminder that evil isn't always direct. Sometimes it disguises itself, pretends to be a friend, a savior, even a light. And to see the true face of the enemy, you need to look deeper, beyond the surface images and promises. In those days I began to write. The paper absorbed my fears, thoughts, and visions. Every word was a cry from the soul, an attempt to convey the truth to those who could still hear. I knew the path would be difficult and lonely, but someone had to go first. The shadows deepened, but the light in my heart didn't fade. I was ready to move on, even if there was more darkness ahead than I could imagine. I was on the threshold of a new reality, the one that opened up to me after the experience. My near-death experience wasn't just a flash of light or emptiness, it was a challenge, an invitation to awaken. What I saw is the truth that many people are so afraid to admit. The truth that poisons the souls of millions. I realized that the sin that drags these people into the abyss is not just a vice or a mistake, but a betrayal of the faith itself. Pride. The same pride that hides itself behind the mask of righteousness, that says, I am better, I am right, rejects humility and love. It has become an invisible prison, a trap from which you cannot escape unless you hear the call and open your heart. I've seen people wander through life with their eyes and ears closed, afraid to look into the depths of their souls, afraid to admit their fears, mistakes, weaknesses. And pride, like poison, slowly kills the light inside. It feeds on fear, lies, and alienation. And it is the door to hell that millions pass through. But this is not the end. I received a message, not just a warning, but hope. Light always breaks through the darkness, even if it doesn't seem to be there. Faith is not blind following, but struggle, awareness, and a constant return to love and humility. It is humility before the Creator that opens the way to salvation. Now my mission is to carry this truth, even if it costs me my very last breath. To say that pride is the enemy inside each of us, and only through the recognition of our weakness, through openness and love, can we overcome it. My words don't always sound soft. Sometimes they are shocking, frightening, even rejected. But this is the price of truth I'm willing to pay. Through fear and pain, I can now see the light. The light that burns in every heart, if we don't let the darkness overshadow it. A light that leads through any challenges. My near-death experience is not the end, but the beginning. The beginning of a journey where each of us must make a choice to remain in lies and pride or step into humility and light. I choose light. And I suggest you choose him, too.